welcome to this pre-budget roundtable that we bring to you in collaboration with BusinessWorld. And the biggest issue, the biggest talking point continues to be around the state of the economy as Arun Jaitley, Finance Minister, looks to present his last full budget in the current term of this government. The biggest issue that continues to concern economists and thinkers and investors, of course, is the fact that what really is the state of the Indian economy, and should enough measures in fact be taken to boost growth, which is looking up, but is it still good enough? We've got a power-packed panel. We've got Dr. Arvind Virmani, Professor Abhijit Sen, Dr. Bhandari, and of course an in-house business world expert as well, Mahua Venkatesh. Let me open this up with Dr. Virmani. Sir, the growth, in fact, the GDP numbers are beginning to look up now, but nevertheless, the FY18 estimate is still at 6.5%. Do you think the government is now going to largely focus in this budget on getting growth on track, or are there enough headwinds for the government to consider?
So the advanced estimate is 6.5, but yes, many of us who are in this forecasting business really don't agree with that, because it's a very mechanical forecast. It really doesn't take account of likely changes in the last 2 quarters. It does use the data which is available till that point, but we have already seen that certain new data points have come which are clearly pointing to a recovery, which many of us have predicted. You know, people have talked about 6.7, I have talked about 6.75. So actually that's a very relevant point, and let me tell you, one can go seriously wrong in budgeting if one doesn't take account of it. So we know that there was a decline in the rate of growth, and then it stabilized and is recovering. So the point, you know, many people are arguing that there's a need for a fiscal boost. Is just the wrong time. It's absolutely the wrong time. If there was any argument for a fiscal boost, it was like 6 months ago, 12 months ago, maybe 18 months ago. Mm-hmm. Now that we are on the recovery, it would be clearly counter-cyclical and the wrong time, in my view. So this is one part of it, and again, because agriculture, I'm sure we will discuss, it's very important that too many people have this short-term view. The point I have been making for the last several years is that we had 2 consecutive droughts. Yes. That has very strong lasting effects. Those effects are now going away with the 2 normal monsoons that have followed, and so people who look at a particular point in time and don't take account of this double drought again go wrong. Things were bad, yes, but they are turning around, in my view. So my basic point here is that there were a lot of things wrong, let's say a year or 2 away, they are on the way up. Yeah.
Professor Sen, come in on this, that, you know, when you talk about growth right now, yes, it's beginning to look up, but let's also now look at the kind of headwinds that exist. You have the crude, which has risen actually 63% in the last 6 odd months. So that's a huge headwind that the economy has to deal with.
Well, first of all, I would call some of the optimism at the moment something of an exuberance. Okay. Growth is certainly picking up, that's unquestioned. But simultaneously, as we go into the next fiscal, we see a lot of macro indicators, the usual macro indicators that judge stability of an economy, starting to look distinctly worse. Inflation clearly is on the way up. Yes. The balance of payments, or certainly the trade side of it, is certainly on the way down, so that deficit is increasing. Indirect tax collections are such that any and the GST uncertainties remain
it's very
so strong,
much there, yes,
that even with fairly large good performance on the direct tax side, I don't see the fiscal situation getting any easier. So the macroeconomic indicators are tight, which would essentially support what Virmani said, that don't rush into a spending spree at this point. However, there are 2 reasons why the finance minister might at least be forced to think of spending sprees. One is the last election, is the pre-election budget. Yes. And the second is his promise to the corporates on the corporate tax side.
Yes.
And that is likely to be, accelerated by what you are seeing with the Trump tax. And there is a general, and I believe that might weigh much more on his mind than I think most people give it credence. But on the whole, of course, it's all in his mind. It's not in my mind or yours.
Of course. Dr. Bhandari, do you think it's again going to be the fiscal math right now for Arun Jaitley is really tough, as Professor Sen was saying?
Well, I think that there will be more or less a consensus on that. I think everyone agrees that it's going to be a very, very tough budget, especially because I think that they are going to keep to the fiscal targets, the deficit targets.
3.2% they'll be able to.
So yes, so it's going to be a tough act, no doubt about it. But I think they'll still be able to manage it in some way, which can obviously, as we were talking about, eventually can be loosened a bit later. But right now, I think they're going to keep to all the targets.
So what, according to you, would be the key focus area in this year's budget? Because we've talked about, as Professor Sen said, that this is the last full budget that Arun Jaitley will present in this government's term. So there will be, of course, political considerations that will weigh in. It would be very naive to say that with 8 state elections and general election around the corner, political compulsions will not weigh in.
I think we are already seeing some indications of it. The first is obviously agriculture. There seems to be a lot of action happening. Whether and how quickly they are able to translate it into some sort of policy changes, or even on the fisc side. But I think most importantly, there's also something happening on the small scale. And you can also see some of the changes, some of the loosening that's happening right now on the GST is, I think, just one part of that story. So I expect there to be some amount of action on both of these, small scale industry and agriculture.
Okay, we'll come to agriculture in a bit, but Mahua, if I can come to you in terms of the specifics, if we can just talk more about the numbers. As we were talking, inflation is most certainly looking up, which means that RBI has no elbow room whatsoever to be able to cut rates any time in the future. Where does this leave North Block right now, in the sense that you have a very tightrope to walk in terms of the numbers that indicate if you don't want to ensure fiscal slippage this year? Yes, the borrowings have been cut down, which the markets gave a huge thumbs up to. But nevertheless, it's a very, very tightrope walk for the North Block.
Yeah, so it is going to be difficult for Finance Minister Jaitley, and especially so because it's going to be the last full budget of the NDA government. Now, private investments haven't happened. Now, the banking sector, of course, the government has taken several actions, several reform measures, and several measures have been taken, but nonetheless, the banking sector is still in doldrums. Okay, so you have to sort of bail them out, and credit growth has to start happening. Investments are not happening.
Though the 2.2 lakh crore that the bailout that they've talked about, the whole Indradhanush scheme, it's definitely a huge push forward.
But I mean, as of now, we are still not out of
work in progress.
Yeah, it's work in progress, right? And this is the last budget, so they really have very little time in their hand. And investments are not picking up. Private investment has been absolutely mute. So it obviously means that the government has to expand its own expenditure, public.
So Dr. Virmani, it will once again be focus on infrastructure from the government's point of view, push the pedal on public investment. That's the only way, because that's the only cylinder on which the economy, so to say, is running.
Right. So the way I look at it is basically, they've announced a particular approach which includes infrastructure, and we've all forgotten this JAM part of it, plus agriculture. That's the extra part. I'll just come to that. But there are all these strings, housing for all,
yes,
electricity, digital connectivity, etc. My guess would be, after you ask the question, that they will kind of put this all together and maybe fill in the gaps by some extra budgetary announcements. I don't expect it to be populist in the sense of huge number of large populist schemes, as we call them,
yes,
but certainly more allocations. In the old days, I used to, the way I used to look at budgets was that I always expected about 10-15% of what I call political expenditures. And those to me are acceptable. If it is below 15, that is decent, you know. So I would expect that, actually. I don't expect them to go overboard. I do expect certain things. I remember one budget, you know, it's not a question of one party or the other, but there were, in one budget, there were like 20 little expenditures. So I call those talking points. You know, so there will be some expenditures which are political talking points, but I think the main focus will be on these things which they have been talking about and maybe integrating it to make a big political type of push.
Do you think there could be one?
And that plus adding the agriculture part, which a lot of people seem to feel is not being adequately addressed.
Yeah. But do you think there'll be one big scheme or announcement that could push growth, so to say, because, you know, it's looking up, but it's been largely
right. So the growth part of it is exactly what you said. There's already, you know, for example, if you recall, in the last budget, there was a big thing made about capital expenditures expanding by like 25 or 30% or something. But I don't think we have seen that. So there would be a push to make sure that the numbers, you know, that we actually see this on the ground. So yes, but it'll be part of the same push, which includes roads, electricity, etc., etc.
So infra will continue to be the
maybe
focus.
packaged more into a socially oriented thing with which they can go to the people.
Okay. Yeah. Professor Sen, do you agree with that, that infra would once again be the big focus, and that would be the factor and area to push growth, as it's been for the last two budgets?
No, I would broadly agree with what Arvind just said, except I'll put it differently. Where I think there might be a difference is in the social sectors, and that partly overlapping with agriculture and rural in general. And I think this government has somehow, I think everybody thinks it should do more about those sectors, those, you know, health, education, general
social sector
rural
schemes,
development.
yes.
Somewhere along the line, there was talk about universal benefit schemes.
Yes.
I don't think that's going to come, but I think you're going to see some sort of a preview of that.
UBI, a
preview of UBI or something of that kind, essentially doing what Arvind thought they would do with infrastructure, which is take a whole set of existing things, add DBT and JAM to it, and say that this is something new, something big. Whether they are prepared for it at this stage, I'm not very sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is the big bang that they're going to throw for the election.
And it would be a lot of talking point for the government as it hits campaign trail. Do you agree that maybe some sort of UBI, universal basic income, could actually take shape in this budget?
I don't think they're going to mess with that because it gets too much of excitement on both sides of that. But I do think that they will have a lot of these announcements effect kind of schemes, which
it was talked at length last year. Sure, go ahead.
So I think that's good. I also don't somehow feel that they're going to be able to do that much more in infrastructure than what they already are doing. Because there really is only that much capacity, even using the public sector and so much. So there will be a few announcements, sure, but I don't see any massive shifts in the allocation of resources, really.
So what do we expect from this budget from a big macro perspective?
I think the first and the most important success of this budget would be to keep at the targets.
The fiscal slippage should not be there.
Yes, absolutely. And I think increasingly, even politically, it will have an impact. I think there's a second part of it as well. There are going to be a lot of announcements. This is what we are building on. So it's not that, yes, I'm giving you right now. It's something that if I come back to power, this is what I will be giving you.
So it will be a very long-term, big picture sort of a scenario. But as far as nitty-gritties are concerned, Dr. Virmani, it could be very little to really...
if you look at the market demand, they are saying there have been enough big things, uncertainty, risks which have been created. Let us calm things down.
Yes.
So I think the government will listen to that. They will try to keep any disruptive thing, and which is why I mentioned this consolidation. It won't be big, new, but maybe new shape, new whatever. I mean, some of that is also necessary. Some of it is political.
Yes.
They won't. So I agree with you. I don't think there will be a UBI type of stuff at all. But DBT, yes, that is part of their program. There may be something on that. I'm not
so
sure.
Minor tinkering
we have been
may
talking.
happen.
No, but the subsidy reform actually, after the big push on LPG, has not progressed. So I don't know. I'm hopeful. I'm not sure whether they are going to do, but maybe do more on that front. Whether it's food or fertilizer or whatever. But I'm not so sure that they will proceed on that.
Fertilizer in an election year looks very difficult.
That's what I
looks
mean.
very difficult, yes.
Yeah, right.
We're slipping into a very, very short break, but don't go away. We come back to talk a lot more about job creation, what needs to be done to actually address some of those headwinds that the Indian economy is facing. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching this pre-budget roundtable where we're talking about the big macroeconomic picture and what really needs to be done by the Modi government to bring growth back to its 8% trajectory. What can really be done? Because, if there are already enough allocations that have been done, so what is it that the government can really do? Because, also talk from the point of view of collections. If you see, the indirect tax collections have been far from being satisfactory. What is it that the government can really do to address agri-crisis and rural distress at a larger level?
See, look here, I think there are several things which, again, cleaning up the stables will always help. You've got a huge expenditure which on insurance, which isn't working particularly well. You've got a
crop insurance scheme has been far from satisfactory.
You've got an MSP system which has its very strong limitations. You've got experiments by states like Madhya Pradesh of deficiency payment. So you let the price fall, but you pay a deficiency payment. Now, when I was talking about UBI, I wasn't talking about UBI per se. I was talking about bringing various types of payments under a single
umbrella scheme.
And pensions, insurance, and deficiency payments make up one part of it. If you add to that the food security, it will become a much larger part. I think food security might be very difficult to do. But I think you will see in this budget, if not a full move, but certainly an intent, saying that over the next 5 years we'll move towards that. Because let's face it, there's very little you can do to agriculture to turn things around within 6 months.
Yes.
Agriculture is a slow-moving thing.
And it needs structural reforms.
All that you can do is to do something on the price side, to buy more, that MSP side, and there if they think slightly out of the box, they would actually go for slightly different ways of doing it. And I think at the back of the mind, it has to be there in any government, which is that when you've got 2 years of good, relatively good monsoon, the third don't be too sure about.
Okay, now let's quickly talk about two specific areas. One is inflation, which a lot of people feel, of course, MSP, the moment you touch it, it obviously has impact on inflation as well. But inflation, as we're saying, is inching up. And then you also have crude, which is now, as I said, 63% higher than what it was 5 months back. It's already at $76. And globally now the expectation is that crude is only going to go northwards from here. Again, limiting the elbow room that the government has.
So first, with crude, you never know.
Yeah.
And global expectations have just not panned out. So we don't know. But at the same time, it's highly unlikely that it would cross very, very high levels. There are enough substitutes around right now.
So you feel it's already peaked at about $76?
No, I'm not. I cannot claim to have that expertise. But what I'm saying is that these kind of things that cannot go way up. Even if it is there, it will be some amount of movements up or down. So it's going to be fairly a stable kind of a thing within a plus minus, let's say, 10-15% range. So I don't think that's the critical problem. The problem actually has to come from, as has happened in the past. You have, as growth inches up, you have some impact happens on the food inflation. And I think that's what, others are also fine. I mean, you just want to be very, very careful.
It is already out of RBI's comfort level. It's upwards of 5%. And the trajectory is only looking northwards from here. So the question I want to now ask all four of you is that what would be the one key thing that you would look for in this budget that could boost growth, that, there's also job creation, that's a big issue that the government is facing.
Can I just address the previous question? On the external, there are many different aspects. I mean, just focusing on one, I think, doesn't give the picture. Starting with the positive, there is a big increase in growth, right? So Europe, US, Japan, even if we have not really taken advantage of it, as some people say, our exports haven't really expanded as fast as some others,
right,
that is going to have a positive effect on our economy. The second one is oil, which we have discussed here. I would say what has been a surprise to me is that the slowness with which the shale has kicked in. But I do expect that shale to kick in. We already have reports that the investment in shale is reviving again. Now, I'm not an expert, but I'm sure it's going to have an effect to limit the oil. And finally, on the inflation side, you've got to remember that in the last few years, the nominal GDP growth, even in India and many other countries, has been way, way lower than historically. So there is a positive aspect to it. When we get back to kind of normal inflation across the world, including India, your nominal GDP is going to progress. So there's a positive side. I'm not saying there's no negative side. And clearly food and other things obviously always bother us, and I don't know either what exactly will happen. So there is a positive and a negative.
Okay, but I want to now touch upon job creation, because the biggest criticism of this government has been around the fact that no jobs or not enough jobs have been created. Professor Sen.
Well, there's a few studies which are coming up disputing that. I don't know how good or how bad those are. The world economy is doing well. We are simply not, we haven't actually, we're going ahead of them, and when the uptick started, we didn't go up with them as much as we could have. And if you look at our exports, we've done relatively well on the corporate exports. We've done miserably on the exports where jobs are created. I don't know whether that's on anyone's agenda, but in a situation of surging world demand, we should have been seeing more in terms of garments exports, more in terms of leather, all those things which make up such a large part of our export thing, and that would then have its own domestic multipliers. And I think whether they are actually looking at it, it can be done, and there it's not interest rates. It definitely is not interest rates which matter. Exchange rates, yes, to some extent, but it's far more about what you do to make those markets work again within India. And these are very complex markets. And but again, like agriculture, there'll be a lot of pages on employment. Rest assured.
Lot of focus on job creation. Yes, very quickly.
Lots of pages, not necessarily budgetary commitment.
It's really sad, and it's amazing that we actually don't have data that any of us would say with some degree of thing. And it's I'm so shocked that something, and so the government cannot really wash its hands off and say that we don't have data, so we can't say. This is the government's responsibility. And if there is no data, then please create some. It doesn't take that long to do these kind of surveys
and job creation should in fact be the focus.
So you have to have data. So that's no excuse. Second, in all likelihood, what you have is a situation where employment really hasn't, even the best estimates will not have, it's not really grown high enough. So that's something that to be concerned about, and you're absolutely right on that.
All right, we leave it there. Many thanks to all our panelists for this pre-budget roundtable. That's it from us. All eyes, of course, on 1st of February when Arun Jaitley will present his last full budget in this term of the Modi government. Remains to be seen how much of this growth push he would actually be able to sustain. Thanks so much for watching this special show.